What if I told you that the same band once dismissed as those surf kids ended up creating one of the greatest albums in rock history, rivaling even the Beatles? What if I told you their story wasn't just about sunny California vibes and catchy jingles, but also about obsession, rivalry, genius, family feuds, drugs, cult leaders, lost masterpieces, and even tragedy? Yep, this is the story of the Beach Boys, a band that started with three brothers, a cousin, and a neighbor, and somehow changed the direction of pop music forever. So grab your board shorts or maybe just a good pair of headphones, because today we're diving deep into how the Beach Boys went from backyard harmonies in Hawthorne, California, to rewriting the rules of music. Our story starts in Hawthorne, California, 1954. Picture it, a quiet suburb, sunshine everywhere, and in one little house, 12-year-old Brian Wilson is glued to the family piano. This kid wasn't like other kids. While most were outside, Brian was teaching himself piano, accordion, and writing his own melodies. Soon he was teaching his younger brothers, Dennis and Carl, how to harmonize. And right there in their living room, the sound that would define the Beach Boys was born. Sweet, layered harmonies that seemed to glow in the air. By the time Brian was 16, the boys had a band. With Carl on guitar, a neighbor named David Marks on rhythm guitar, and cousin Mike Love stepping up as a frontman, the group had chemistry. Then Brian's high school buddy Al Jardine joined on bass. Even Dennis, who was more into surfing than music, finally agreed to learn drums. At first, they called themselves the Pendletones, a pun based on the flannel Pendleton shirts surfers loved to wear. But destiny had bigger plans. Dennis, the only real surfer in the band, pushed Brian to write songs about the California lifestyle. And in September 1961, they recorded Brian's song Surfin'. It wasn't polished, but it was catchy. A tiny label released it as a single, and to everyone's surprise, it became a minor hit. But the label thought the Pendletones sounded clunky. So, without even asking the band, they rebranded them as the Beach Boys. And honestly, it stuck. By late 1961, they were playing their first gigs, even if those early shows were kind of a disaster. But by 1962, the Beach Boys had signed a 7-year deal with Capitol Records, and their single Surfin' Safari cracked the Billboard Top 20. For the first time, surf culture had a soundtrack, The Rise. Surf, cars, and teen dreams through 1962 and 1963, the Beach Boys became America's surf rock poster boys. Albums like Surfin' Safari and Surfin' USA were filled with catchy songs about surfing, cars, and teenage love. And here's the wild part. Unlike many bands of the era, they were writing their own material. Brian and Mike Love were churning out hits like a factory, but there was something different about their sound. It wasn't just surf guitars and simple riffs. Brian was layering harmonies, double-tracking vocals, and experimenting with reverb. Their record sounded bigger, shinier, and more alive than anything else on the radio. By 1963, America knew who the Beach Boys were. They had hit after hit, Surfer Girl, In My Room, Little Deuce Coupe. They even had Christmas singles on the charts. But behind the scenes, cracks were already forming. Brian hated touring. Dennis was diving into drugs. And their father, Murray Wilson, who managed the band, was controlling to the point of being abusive. By 1964, Brian quit touring altogether to focus solely on writing and producing in the studio. This move? It would change music history. 64 wasn't just the year of surfboards and sunshine. It was also the year of the British invasion. The Beatles had landed in America, and suddenly rock and roll was evolving at lightning speed. Instead of crumbling under the pressure, Brian took it as a challenge. He became obsessed with outdoing the Beatles, especially after hearing their album Rubber Soul. While the rest of the band was on the road, Brian was in the studio pushing boundaries. He was mixing in instruments no rock band had ever used before: harpsichords, French horns, vibraphones, even bicycle bells. He was layering vocals like a mad scientist. And in 1966, all of that came together in one masterpiece, Pet Sounds. Released in May 1966, Pet Sounds wasn't just another surf rock record. It was a concept album, meant to be listened to start to finish, as one experience. Songs like Wouldn't It Be Nice, God Only Knows, and Sloop John B. weren't just catchy, they were deeply emotional, arranged with a richness no pop album had attempted before. Critics at first didn't know what to make of it. Some fans were confused, but musicians, they got it. Paul McCartney later called God Only Knows the most beautiful song ever written. And the Beatles responded by making Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Think about that. Without Pet Sounds, there might not have been Sgt. Pepper's. That's how much Brian Wilson raised the bar. And just when the world thought he couldn't top himself, Brian went back into the studio to work on something even bigger. Brian's next project was called Smile. He teamed up with lyricist Van Dyke Parks, aiming to create a purely American response to the British invasion, a psychedelic, avant-garde journey through American culture. The press hyped it up as the greatest rock album ever. But Brian's perfectionism, combined with drug use and worsening mental health, slowed everything down. Capitol Records grew impatient. The band was confused. And Brian cracked under the pressure. In 1967, the sessions were scrapped. Instead, a watered-down version, Smiley Smile, was released and flopped. Smile became one of the most famous lost albums in rock history, fueling decades of fan speculation. The late 60s and 70s were rough. Brian retreated from the spotlight, battling drug addiction and mental illness. The band experimented with R&B, soul, even spiritual themes, but critics mostly shrugged. Meanwhile, Dennis Wilson got entangled with none other than Charles Manson. Yes, that Charles Manson. Dennis briefly housed him and his family before realizing the danger, but the connection haunted the band's reputation. They still had occasional success. Albums like Sunflower and Surf's Up gained cult followings. But commercially, they were falling behind. It wasn't until a surprise greatest hits album, Endless Summer, in 1974 that the Beach Boys regained momentum, suddenly filling stadiums again as nostalgia icons. The following decades were a roller coaster. Brian returned for bursts of brilliance, then disappeared again. The band kept touring, even as members split into factions. In 1983, tragedy struck when Dennis drowned at just 39 years old. 15 years later, Carl Wilson died of cancer at only 51. Yet somehow the Beach Boys carried on. They released albums, collaborated with everyone from Glenn Campbell to John Stamos, and kept their legacy alive on the road, even if lawsuits and family feuds often made headlines. Through it all, the music endured. Good Vibrations, that 6-month, $50,000 experiment of a single, remains one of the most iconic songs of the 1960s. Pet Sounds is now widely considered one of the greatest albums of all time. In 2012, for their 50th anniversary, the surviving members reunited for a tour and their final studio album, That's Why God Made the Radio. It debuted at number 3 on the Billboard charts, nearly 50 years after their debut. Today, Mike Love continues touring with the Beach Boys name. Brian Wilson, though retired due to health, is celebrated as one of music's greatest creative minds. They've sold more than 128 million records worldwide. They've influenced artists from the Beatles to Radiohead to Tame Impala, and they proved that pop music could be more than disposable. It could be art. So, what started with a few kids harmonizing in a Hawthorne living room ended up reshaping popular music forever. They gave us sunshine, surfboards, and teenage dreams, but they also gave us masterpieces that pushed music into uncharted territory. Now, I've got a question for you. What's your favorite Beach Boys song? Are you more of a Good Vibrations fan, a God Only Knows believer, or maybe a deep cut kind of person? Drop your pick in the comments. I'd love to see which songs resonate with you most. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button, subscribe for more legendary stories, and let me know which band I should cover next. Until then, may you always have good vibrations.